Hey, what's happening? My name is Tutu Marangwala. Happy Tuesday, and here are your news updates. South African singer Nicole Magolie has responded to the widespread criticism she received online following her rendition of our national anthem before the test between the Springboks and Italy this past Saturday. The 2022 World Cup has kicked off in Qatar, and not without any controversy. And a pair of old sandals worn by Steve Jobs in the 1970s and 80s was sold at an auction for more than 3 million rands. Let's get right into it. It's Mzansi in 5. Let's start off with Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, the company that gave the world the iPhone, the MacBook, and iPad. Also, the company that changes its earphone and charging ports every year so that their customers can spend more money on accessories they already own from previous devices. The same company that was fined $19 million by the Brazilian government this year because they started selling iPhones without chargers to save the environment. You know, just like how you'd buy a car with no engine so you can reduce carbon gas emissions. This past week, a pair of sandals worn by Steve and J.O.B. during the 70s and 80s was sold for a whopping $218,000, which is approximately 3.7 million rands. Now, if you've already guessed that the person who paid for these sandals is not of a darker persuasion, then you've got that white. Now, I don't care if I had all the money in the world. I would never pay that much money for used clothing. I'm a Christian man. I've read the Bible 2.5 times. Well, I read the Bible once. And then the other times, I just read the New Testament because the sequel is a lot better. Even if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't pay that much money for Jesus' sandals. And those walked on water. Moving on. South African singer Nicole Magolie has defended herself amidst the widespread criticism she received online following her rendition of the national anthem before the test between the Springboks and Italy this past Saturday. It sounded like she was singing the national anthem at a funeral for a puppy that got run over by a drunk driver who had just found out that his wife was cheating on him with the tennis coach he paid so much money for her to have. It was just sad. According to Magolie, this wasn't her fault because the conductor started slow, and despite her best attempts to speed things up, she was at the mercy of the band. So I'll give her an olive branch and take her word for it. But to cleanse our palates, here's a proper rendition of our national anthem. And finally, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar is well underway, and like with most World Cups, it has not come without any scrutiny. From how Qatar went about obtaining the rights to host this year's competition, to Qatar's treatment of migrant workers, women, and members of the LGBTQIAP community, I support the movement. But there's too many letters. One of the letters is A, which stands for asexual, which is a person who's not attracted to anyone. So why are you a part of the community if you don't want to? You know what? I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent. We're talking about Qatar. So let's start off with how Qatar won its bid to host this year's competition. Back in 2010, despite only having one stadium, one major city, a horrible human rights record, and a country that is smaller than Limpopo, or if you're in America, a country the size of Connecticut, Qatar beat the USA in a landslide of 14-8 votes. And it was substantively clear that it was due to corruption, because the US has more than 140 stadiums that have a capacity of 40,000 or more people. It's also massive and would have had the capacity to accommodate an influx of over 1 million tourists. Now, over the last 12 years, multiple investigations and probes into FIFA have revealed that Qatar did in fact win the right to host the event through bribing officials, including and not limited to a weapons and infrastructure contract worth $14 billion with France. You know, France, the country that builds the best weapons, and Qatar, the country that's currently in the middle of a war. Now, but the truth is, FIFA is the most powerful criminal organization in the world. They make the Yakuza, Mafia, and South American drug cartels seem like my granny's monthly Stockfell group. So they're the ones that made the bidding process a corrupt game. Qatar was merely playing according to those rules. It just so happened they had enough money to beat the other bribing countries. So Qatar wins the bid in unscrupulous ways. Now comes the time to build stadiums. And although Qatar has a population of over 3 million people, only 300,000 of them are actually Qatari natives, which is terrifying. The idea of living in a country where 90% of the population is foreign. I don't know, it's just, at any moment they could just revolt. This actually became what put most of Qatar's inadequacies in the spotlight. The country had to get migrant workers from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Kenya through a hiring strategy called the kafala system, an exploitative system where workers from third world nations are recruited to work in the Middle East with the promises of doubling or even tripling their wages. Upon arriving, their passports and ID documents are confiscated from them by their employers, and they are unable to switch jobs without permission from said employer. And for most of them, the wages they were promised are never fully realized.
Back to where they lived, in the industrial area, their housing arrangements were familiar. They work 12 hours a day plus 2 hours transit, 7 days a week. They struggle to stay healthy.
And this is the literal definition of modern day slavery. And you might be thinking, if they don't like their jobs, why don't they just leave? Well, they can't, because that's how slavery works.
They give them another contract. It's 600 basic. And then I refused that contract. I said I'll not sign the contract. I want to leave. What's the office in the office, say if you don't like to sign, cancel it. You give the paper to cancel the...
Cancel what?
Cancel the contract.
And then what will happen to you?
I don't sign it because I don't have the money to then ticket here.
It's been estimated that about 6,500 migrant workers died during the construction of these slave stadiums. And this has been my biggest vexation with Qatar hosting the World Cup. 6,500 people don't need to die so that a bunch of multimillionaires can kick a ball around a field. But it's not the only remonstrance that people have had. Like I mentioned before, Qatar does not like the gays. In fact, it's illegal and punishable for up to 3 years in prison. Which is ironic, because on Sunday I clearly remember seeing the Qatari national team get by 11 Ecuadorian men in front of 60,000 people. Got it! I hope the Senegalese also want a shot. Now, the final major issue of contention surrounding Qatar is its treatment of women. And I'm going to play devil's advocate, which is always a weird term for me because the devil doesn't need an advocate because he's the devil. Now, it's been widely reported that women in Qatar are second-class citizens, they're disenfranchised, they need permission from male guardians to travel or study abroad, they need permission to get government jobs or to marry, which is partly true. However, what isn't mentioned in Western news media, labor force participation rates of Qatari women are above the world average and among the highest in the Arab world, which comes mainly as a result of an increasing number of Qatari women who are attaining academic degrees. And this is symptomatic of what the West does, right? Once they've decided their country is bad, then every aspect of its culture, laws, and religion is suddenly horrendous. What I'm trying to do is essentially be clear about the horrific things that have happened in Qatar, mainly the employing of slave labor, non-existent LGBTQ rights, yes, and some weird laws regarding women, but most of the women in Qatar are educated, they have jobs, and don't get it twisted, this is not Iran. Girls aren't being executed for showing their ears in public. In fact, Qatar and Kuwait are amongst the most liberal countries relative to other Arab nations. Another important note is the wording of these laws by Western media. So women do need permission from a male guardian to do all the things I mentioned up to a certain age, which is 25. And men can travel, study, and work from the age of 18, which is definitely unfair. I'm not saying it's right, but it is their belief system. So I don't think that that should be grouped in with the human rights atrocities I've already mentioned. Which brings me to my final point. We are all complicit. By we, I mean football fans. All 3.5 billion of us that are going to be watching the tournament this season. The 1 million people that traveled to Qatar and immediately started complaining about sleeping in shipping containers for 5,000 rand a night. Like, what did you expect? So we're all hypocrites. I mean, I'm literally writing, shooting, and editing this episode on technology that was probably assembled by a 9-year-old in Yemen. I made fun of Steve Jobs' sandals earlier on, even though the man decided to recycle and make his own shoes for 20 years. As I sit here wearing my Nike Prime DF2s. Literally one step in these shoes, and you can immediately tell that they were made with tiny hands. Well, that was another episode of The World is Horrible and So Are We. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Tuto Marangula. It's Mzansi in 5.